Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. We're just letting everyone join the room here. I'm Steve Schwartz. I run the LSAT blog. I also host the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. I've been teaching the LSAT for about 15 years now. Personally, I went from a 152 to a 175 on test day. Took me an entire year. Hopefully, it won't take you nearly that long. And part of my goal is to help you prep in maybe 3 to 5 months max. I've got a variety of books and courses and such, which I'll get into more later. But for now, I want to invite Jayme to introduce herself. Jayme, you want to share a little bit about your background? I'm really excited to have you on here.
Yes. Hey, Steve, thank you so much for having us. I don't get a lot of opportunities to speak to groups of law school applicants anymore. It's often really one-on-one, so this is fun. Again, my name is Jayme McKellop. I'm a senior consultant with the Spivey Consulting Group. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Spivey Consulting, we are a law school admissions consulting firm. Our mission is pretty straightforward. It's to help applicants through the law school admissions process. We get to know the applicants, we get to know their strengths, their weaknesses, what they want to convey through their applications, and can really help them navigate and understand, what are my strengths and my experiences, in profile, what do those look like to a law school admissions committee? I view our role as really to be a source of accurate and reliable information, and to really help applicants find their voice. But the ultimate goal is obviously to help applicants put together the best application possible. Before joining Spivey Consulting, I worked as the Director of Admissions at the University of Chicago Law School. And before that, I practiced employment labor law at a law firm here in Chicago called Sidley Austin. And that was my first job out of law school, and a proud Vanderbilt Law alum. It was quite some time ago, so I do, like you, have some, I do remember what these applicants are going through at this stage of the process.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, I'm really excited to hear more about your experience. Spivey Consulting is a fantastic consulting group putting out top quality information, really tracking things very closely. So I'm really glad to have this partnership with you here. And I'm thinking for tonight that I'll talk a little bit about the digital LSAT and the changes happening this year. You could talk a bit about the admissions process and what's happening this cycle, just giving applicants advice for what to do going forward. Yeah. Then, of course, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A.
Okay.
All right, fantastic. So digital LSAT, we're coming out of the first fully digital LSAT in North America that happened just this past Saturday. So really exciting that these changes are finally happening. Of course, there were a few tech issues, as always, with the digital LSAT transition. There were plenty in July, still some in September. Hopefully there will be fewer going forward. LSAC is, of course, working on this, but things move slowly sometimes. So be patient and maybe go for November instead of October if you're really concerned about it. But ultimately, LSAC does make things right in the end, even if it does require you following up a little bit. The biggest thing that you can do is when you walk into your test center, be ready for a little bit of glare on the tablet screen itself. And when you walk in, check that out. If it's not right, of course, you can ask the proctor to move you to a different seat if necessary, just to get that fixed before the timer actually starts. Now, like I said, it is on a tablet, specifically a Microsoft Surface Go 10-inch tablet, which means that you want to practice on a tablet. Doesn't have to be that Microsoft one specifically. Could be a Samsung, could be an iPad, could be an Amazon Fire that you buy for the LSAT and return later if you decide that you don't like it. But it is worth at least having some familiarity with that. And the digital LSAT has a familiarization tool for it on LSAC's site at familiar.lsac.org. You can go on there and play around with the few LSAT exams they have on their site just to get used to the highlighting and underlining features. I don't think those features are fantastically responsive to the stylus, but there are some benefits as well. You can flag questions to come back to later, and you can eliminate choices on the screen, which is really nice in terms of that interactivity. I think at this point, going forward for October or November, if you're looking to retake, of course, you want to think about what you're going to do differently the next time around. If you jumped ahead to doing full-length exams, rather than learning the basics first, you might want to slow down and look at what your weak areas were. I recommend a 5-step approach to LSAT studying that I call the LASER approach: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. Learning is theory. Accuracy is individual questions by type to learn the basics. Sections are full-length 35-minute sections to work on your pacing. E is for endurance, full-length 5-section timed exams. then R is for the review process, which I'll talk a bit more about later. And this framework is what all of my LSAT study plans are based upon: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. Don't jump to the later steps before doing the earlier ones. That's what a lot of the common pitfalls are. So I'll leave off there and we'll get more into the LSAT and admissions later, but I want to turn over to you, Jayme, to share a bit about what's happening on the admissions side.
Yeah, well, these are big changes, on the admissions side with the LSAT, obviously. And I saw some notes that people are having trouble hearing my mic. I'm going to try to talk a lot louder and a lot slower. And I'm also getting closer to the computer. We had a headset malfunction before we started, so I'm going to do my best, but I'm sorry about that. But I think, now we're just, we're just going to see how this cycle, plays out with the LSAT, and how it kind of affects how the cycle goes. And, to be honest, I have heard a lot from, my clients on the, too much in terms of, complaints or difficulties with the transition to digital. And I think we're, just going to see how it turns out.
What's your take, Jayme, on the LSAT specifically? As we know, like half of students canceled the July LSAT, in part due to that incentive of getting the free retake on a future administration. So how do you imagine that the law schools will look at cancellations in general with the digital transition, and specifically for July where there was that incentive?
Yeah, I don't think law schools are going to care at all about those cancellations. Typically, law schools aren't going to care about cancellations as long as it's not a pattern. If a person has one cancellation, that's not going to be an issue. And it's really not going to be an issue for the July LSAT when so many applicants have canceled. Our read on it is that a lot of applicants really found this as kind of a freebie. It's like, I'll take it, see how it goes. Obviously, if I get the score I want, I keep it. If I don't, I'm retaking it. So, we'll see. I just don't think it's going to be a concern at all from the law school side of things. And I don't know that it really changes. I don't really think it's going to change the review process or the timeline for law schools, really, because many law schools aren't, getting a lot of decisions out at this stage anyway. Most of them are really, they kind of ease into the file review process during their, right now is really fall recruiting and travel time, and they're easing into this process, and it really won't be until November and beyond when we start seeing a lot of decisions come out.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about if folks are going ahead with October and November, and they might be canceled? They might want to cancel that just because, in general, students often feel uneasy walking out of the LSAT. They're like, well, that didn't go that well, I should cancel. And then later, of course, it could have turned out that it was a great score, but they didn't know, they just felt uneasy. Is there ever a reason that you would recommend students cancel, given that law schools, my understanding is they don't average multiple scores?
No, they don't. Law schools see every score, but they report the highest. So that's what they care about. There can be, it's rarely a situation where I advise an applicant to cancel. If you know something went dramatically wrong, if if you became ill during the test, you really have to know something seriously went wrong in order to cancel. I mean, there have been a handful of times where I've thought, okay, this makes sense to cancel, but for the most part, like you said, a lot of applicants feel uneasy, coming out of the test, and you don't know how you did. And the law schools are taking the highest. So, and if there's a huge difference in scores, you can always write an addendum, to that effect, and what you attribute that difference to be. So I think absent really extreme circumstances, I don't usually recommend canceling.
Well, thanks for that. And speaking of LSAT addenda, what about, one question I get a lot from students is, people email me and they're like, I've tried the LSAT several times, score is not budging. Can I write an addendum for a low LSAT score? Is that good enough? Is that okay? When is it warranted? I feel like a lot of applicants want to over-explain things.
Oh, yeah.
But when do you tell them yes? And when do you tell them no, and why?
Okay. So there definitely is a tendency to over-explain. And, you don't want your application to ever feel like one big explanation. So you always want to be cognizant of what else you're explaining in your application. Each piece of the application is looked at in the context of everything else. So you got to think about, do you have, more isn't always better. So do you have a GPA addendum? What are the things you have in your application that you're explaining? So that's always something that I'm thinking about is what else is in this person's application. But then, to answer that specific question, when there's a big discrepancy in scores, it's certainly a time, and that's a situation where you should, truthfully tell them, what you attribute that difference in scores to. Did you change the way that you prepared? Did you change your mindset? What's the reason for the difference? If someone's not, if you're talking about the situation you mentioned where your score isn't budgy, you just want to write, essentially that your LSAT is not indicative of your ability, that's a tougher one, because often it's not that persuasive. But I think times where that can make sense are if someone has a really high GPA, and the LSAT is not consistent with that GPA, then that can be a powerful addendum, and when you can really make the case that your GPA is more indicative of your ability as a student and your ability to perform in law school. But you need something to support it. It's like you need the GPA to support it. Sometimes SAT scores can be helpful. You can say, the SAT did not predict my ability to perform at X school, where I graduated with, a 4.0 GPA. But you need something to back it up. It can't just be my LSAT score is not representative of my ability.
I love that advice you gave about the SAT score, because I love that's real hard evidence saying that here's a previous case where the single day standardized test did not reflect my true abilities, as is the case, argument by analogy, right? And that's also the case with the LSAT. And if you have a strong GPA to show you can actually do the work, I obviously I think the LSAT's a great exam, but I also don't love all that reliance on a single day, a single number. And so a good reason to argument there, I think, could make a lot of sense. Now, with these addenda, a lot of students, they send me these drafts that are way too long, like 1,000 words, several paragraphs. I usually hear shorter is better. What do you typically recommend in terms of length?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you have to say, of course. And you'll probably hate hearing that, and I think our clients hate hearing that, but our answer is always, it depends. But certainly no more than a page. Probably a couple of paragraphs, 2 to 3 paragraphs. But you don't want to it's a middle ground. You want to provide enough information, and you want to provide some substance and some detail, but you don't want to go overboard. And again, it's always thinking about what else is in your application. Again, like length for the sake of length is not better. So you want to, with every piece of your application, you want to think about, okay, what is one of the skills that I need to have as an attorney? And that's to present relevant information in the most concise and organized way possible. So all of these addenda are a writing sample. They are an example of the way that you communicate. So it's not just the personal statement that needs to be strong writing. And I think that's something that's often overlooked by applicants is that they put all this focus on their personal statement, not realizing that these other addenda are also samples of their writing and their ability to communicate.
Right. I imagine adcoms are reading all of these in one sitting. And so if the personal statement's awesome and the other addenda are kind of thrown together last minute, you see that discrepancy that that makes you ask which one's the true representation, right?
Yeah. It also really detracts from your application. One of the things that, I talk about a lot is, really like thinking about this kind of cohesive communication that you're putting together. And, you want to show attention to detail, and you want to show that you put the effort in. This all needs to look consistent and be of the same quality. You don't want anything to feel like an afterthought. You have to show that you put that sustained effort into every piece of your application. It makes a huge difference. If you see an amazing personal statement And then the rest of the documents just get thrown together. And that's a big issue.
Right, of course. Now, do you want to share a little bit about the other parts of the application, general recommendations?
Yeah, we talked, when we talked a little bit before this webinar, we talked about, not necessarily running through each piece of it. And law school applicants now are quite sad. There's a lot of information out there. That's the good and bad. But we all, I think most applicants are now familiar with, what you need. So you need, your personal statement, your supplemental essays, your addenda, your resume, your transcripts, all of those things. And, really, a lot of applicant questions center around, what's the best approach to put all of these things together. So I think, I can mention some really kind of key perspective points that I would have applicants keep in mind as they're going through this process. The first thing I would say, and this is probably my most important piece of advice, is to be yourself and be genuine. I know that sounds simple, but it's really, really important. And there's a lot of ways to stand out in this process. That's probably the most common question I got when I used to do recruiting trips at the University of Chicago, which was, how can I stand out? How can I make myself unique? And there's a number of ways to do that. One way is, of course, with your quantitative factors, with your LSAT and GPA. But another way, it's really by being truly authentic, by being genuine. And, there's a few ways where, this is the most relevant. I think first is with your essays, particularly your personal statements. A lot of applicants write to a hypothetical admissions committee. And you can tell that they're doing that, and you can tell that they're writing what they think they're supposed to write, or what they think the law school wants to hear. It can sound stilted. It often sounds really formal. They kind of start the same, like with a hook to try to get the reader's attention. Convincing the reader how much they know about the law, and those aren't the things that you need to do. I always say that your audience isn't this mythical admissions committee. Your audience is you. Your job is to get the ideas that are in your head down on the page and to communicate them in an authentic way that's in your voice. And you need to be professional, and it needs to be a great piece of writing. But you still want to be yourself. And it is shocking, like how much that stands out. When you're spending a day reading applications and they all sound the same. When you get someone who really, you can see the person behind it, it's huge. It's such a way that people stand out. The other thing I would say to keep in mind on this note is, to engage in this process of self-reflection. We commonly hear from applicants, I'm not interested, or there's nothing special about me, there's nothing interesting about me, I haven't experienced any real adversity, or I don't have a defining accomplishment, and that's okay. This process of self-reflection is really understanding who you are. Who am I? What do I have to say? What are my transformative experiences? There isn't one set of experiences or background that law schools are looking for. Everyone has a voice and has something to say. So, law schools aren't looking for the same set of experiences, the same profile. They want a variety of people, and I think I just always encourage our applicants to really get in touch with who they are and their message, and and communicate that to law schools in an authentic way. I think that's one of the most important things they can keep in mind. The other important point that I would make is, and I spoke to this a bit earlier when we were talking about addenda and how all the application pieces fit together, but it's to put effort into the process. This is another way to stand out. These little things, they add up. Taking your time, put the effort in. This is your chance to present yourself and create your narrative. And so the cohesiveness and how you frame issues and circumstances in your application, your attention to detail, make a huge difference. And you can absolutely tell when someone has put the effort in. It's thinking about how all the pieces of your application go together. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't want a GPA addendum and an LSAT addendum. If you're coming think about, is my application going to feel like one big explanation? If you're coming straight from undergrad, and don't have a lot of work experience, think about areas where your application may be a bit lighter. Maybe if that's your situation, maybe a more serious or academic topic, is a better choice for you. Something that allows you to show some intellectual depth and maturity. But it's always thinking about kind of getting that handle on who am I, my strengths and weaknesses, and how are all these different pieces of the application going to fit together. And then paying attention to those details. Make sure the dates in your resume are all formatted the same. Your header is the same on all your documents. You're varying, your word choice and your sentence structure. You're saying you're expressing your ideas in the most precise way possible. Those things all add up, and we can talk certainly through questions or any follow up on specific parts of the application. But I think those are some of the overarching themes I would like applicants to keep in mind.
Oh, thanks for that rundown, Jayme. Really useful. It's funny. I'm thinking back to when I was writing my college essay, and I had a printer and I printed out draft after draft after draft and actually went over it with a pen and pencil. And these days I feel like nobody has a printer anymore.
Yeah.
And so
they probably should. They probably should do that. It's and part of it, I think it can be an adjustment when you get to the law school application process and the level of formality that's required. We are all so used to, and even, I'm not exactly sure, where you are, generation-wise, but it's, so even for those of us who didn't, who got us off out of college or sort of outing myself there with what I got my first stuff in, but all of us have become more informal in our communications. We're communicating through text, and it's all quick. And I think there's definitely an adjustment there when you get into the law school application process. Like, the expectation is that it is formal, and it is more polished, and it's not just 2 drafts and that's good enough. No, it's really I think that's a if you can find a printer, I think that's a great way to do things. But it should be it should be a lot of rounds of edits, and you should also, it's not just edits for your grammar and punctuation or word choice. It's also really for substance. Reevaluating your substance. Is this as clear as it could be, or is this an area that I could add a little bit of personal depth by a few more details? But it's really it's putting that time in.
Yeah, I love the example you were talking about, writing to the admission committee versus like writing to yourself. And I have this image, at least I'm able to think of, like, all the very formal drafts I've seen where it's like, "Dear esteemed admissions committee, like I beseech you." Like,
no.
So I know that's like the bad example. Yeah. But then as for like a good example, is there a way you could paint a little bit of a picture of what that might look like? I know every statement's different, but anything you could shed light on?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I mean, certainly I have great examples of personal statements, and they run the gamut. It would be a crazy range of topics. If I start talking about my favorite personal statements, I mean, they're all over the map, from things that sound like they should be a law school personal statement, like my leadership experiences. And that actually sounds like a pretty boring one. And it sounds like something you shouldn't do, because it sounds like, they're just going to be restating their resume, trying to sell themselves. But the one I'm thinking of in particular, and we worked really hard that it wasn't just restating their resume or selling yourself. It was beautifully done. So it was a wonderful topic with great examples of these experiences and personal growth, and it was also very personal. And then I have another favorite personal statement that's about fly fishing. It's just, they're all over the map. And example wise, I think it's really when it reflects the applicant's voice. I hesitate to say informal, because I just talked about how you need to be formal and it needs to be professional. But it's, it kind of loses it's more direct. I guess that's one of the most important things I'd say is you could probably, and that's something that I think surprises a lot of clients, is that you can speak more directly than you think you can. You don't need a hook when you start. You don't need to grab the reader's attention. Just start talking. Just start telling them what you want to tell them. And the tricky thing with this kind of question is that, once again, it depends. And it depends on the topic. And it should reflect the person's writing style. That's probably one of the most important things, is when I say voice, when someone is it should be the way you speak. It should be the way you think, the way you communicate. And that's what's so effective, is when you can see the person's kind of distinct writing style and voice. So, all of these things I'm saying, I know sound super corny, but it's, be true to who you are. And, if you speak in a very stilted, formal way, well, then maybe that's okay. Maybe that's who you are. But if you don't, then don't do that. Then you can really feel free to write in your own voice.
What I'm really taking away from this, Jayme, is really that it's about being human.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you can be human, not overly formal, like you're saying, esteemed admissions committee, but you're also not being casual, like a millennial with emojis and LOL and all that.
No emojis.
So that sweet spot.
No emojis, no Latin phrases. That's something that drives people crazy. And we actually have a blog post on our Spivey Consulting blog about the most repeated words and personal statements. I would check that one out, because they're not necessarily things that you would think. But you can be more casual, and you can be more direct. And don't, it shouldn't sound like you went through a thesaurus. Some people speak that way. But it shouldn't sound like you've tried to find, the most complex or the biggest word to describe, what you're trying to describe.
Right, and you want them to like you, and nobody really likes having to look things up.
No, and that, Steve, I think is probably, one of the most important points. It's, at the end of the day, you want them to like you, and you want them to think, wow, there's a human here. And that's kind of to my point about being genuine. It's, there's a human being here, and this is someone that I would like to have in my class. It's also someone who pays a lot of attention to detail and can communicate really well and present their ideas concisely. But it's also someone I like, someone that I would want to have in my class.
Awesome. Thanks for the rundown again. We've got a ton of questions here that have been coming in. Let's dig into these a little bit. All right. So we've got one from Solomon, who's asking about do people get a boost in admissions from coming from a socioeconomic disadvantaged background, even if they're not an underrepresented minority?
Yes. I would say that really, that really falls, they do. But that really falls in the category of, when I'm talking about looking at the application as a whole, and, you're really looking at, everything about that applicant and what they're going to bring to a law school class, and what their perspective is going to add. And when someone is from, maybe that person's going to have, be able to represent a voice that, otherwise isn't going to be found in their law school class, or they, how to overcome a lot, or, certainly something that I think I used to see in that situation is, there's some people who, for a lot of their life, they've kind of known they're going to law school, or they've been in positions where if they have someone telling them they're going to go to law school and how to go to law school and advising them, and there's a lot of people who have to really have grit and resilience and do it themselves. And so to the extent that, an individual's background shows that, absolutely, absolutely that's the boost.
Awesome. So
that answers the question.
I think it does. So I think what you're saying is that it's not really the sort of thing where we can put hard numbers on it and crunch the stats. Yeah. It's really more like for certain edge cases where we're really digging into the individual, those sorts of things do come into consideration in a softer kind of way.
Yeah, and I think they come into consideration in every circumstance, and they can make a difference in every circumstance. But yeah, like I said earlier, this is not a formulaic process, so it's really difficult to, and a lot of things can be a boost. So it's really difficult, and how much, depends on that applicant and, that school and that admissions process.
I was also thinking that admission officer, like sometimes it's a human process. If they have a personal connection to that person's story, that could be a boost, and it's idiosyncratic.
That's you're kind of a scary part for us.
We don't want to believe it, but it's true.
You're not incorrect. You're not incorrect. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for that. Let's dig into some other ones here. Cynthia is asking, if someone's looking to take both the November and January LSATs, when should they start drafting personal statements and all the other parts of the application, doing both LSAT and an application side by side? How does that work? Should someone do it that way?
Do you want me to jump in on that first?
Yeah. You jump in and I'll give my take.
Okay, then I'd love to hear your take as an LSAT coach. So again, tough question. That depends on the individual. So the first thing I would say is, what else do you have going on? Are you working full time? Are you in school full time? How much are you juggling? Because the priority. Okay, I just saw working full time. Okay, well that. You have a lot of you don't have a lot of extra time. I think your priority has to be the LSAT. So you need to put the time into the LSAT, and because having we've talked about all of these different factors and how to differentiate yourself. Well, the most important factors are still, and as challenging as sometimes it can be to have this conversation, the most important factors are LSAT and GPA. And your chances are significantly better if you are at or above their medians. So your priority has to be the LSAT. You're going to, and I think the question is, it really kind of depends on, if we're just talking about November, then I would say focus on the LSAT. And then once that LSAT is done, like really, you're not going to have a lot of time to waste. Get super focused on putting those application materials together. I'd want you to apply as soon as possible, as soon as you can, when you get those scores back. The January LSAT, I still feel fine about the November LSAT. The January LSAT's getting later in the process. So, I think ideally, I'd have you working on those application materials after the November LSAT. But I realize that's going to be tough to balance. Steve, I'm curious your thoughts as an LSAT coach.
Well, sure. Thanks, Jayme. And as an LSAT coach, I definitely agree. The LSAT is the most important thing. No surprise there coming from me. But I also love what you said about the distinction between November and January. Because if someone is taking November, they still do have that 3-week wait to get their scores back. And you could do a lot in 3 weeks. So I'd say November LSAT, only 2 months away. Buckle down, knock it out of the park, then use those 3 weeks and apply soon afterwards. Soon after you get your score back.
Yeah.
But as you said, January, on the other hand, is starting to get a little bit later. That also gives you 4 months to study for the LSAT. So in that case, maybe the applicant could do them side by side. A bit of LSAT, take a break from that, work on the personal statement, LSAT, then work on the addendum, LSAT, rec letters, and all that, mixing them up, taking a break from each one, working on the other. And then, of course, you submit as soon as possible.
Yep. I'd agree with that.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then we actually had a related question about applying a little bit later in the cycle. How many seats or what percentage of seats are available towards the end of the calendar year, towards then into the spring? Like, when does things start to get tougher?
Yeah.
How much is left? I assume that varies a lot.
It varies a lot. So we actually, and not for this to sound like a shameless plug, but we actually have a great blog on timing. We have one of our consultants is a big data person, and he has a really great blog on application timing, and really kind of divides it up by LSAT score bands and talks about. And he's got this really awesome chart in there about when, based on your LSAT score, when are you getting the most advantage from applying early? When is it? What's early? What's neutral? And what's late, basically. And that's on our blog, our Spivey Consulting blog that you can find on our website. So while it does vary, I would say there's a big difference between the end of the calendar year and, kind of what did you say, the spring? Like,
yeah, I said the spring. So let's say like February, March.
There's a big difference. I can't give a percentage, and it will probably vary from year to year, and that would be school specific, but there are still a lot of offers to be made in January and February. It is not game over at the end of the calendar year at all. There are tons of offers to be made in January and February. The issue with applying, when you're talking about applying later into February, is that things are really bottlenecked. There's a big queue of applications to read, and it takes time to get through those applications. And by the time they get through those applications, there may not be, a lot of seats left once you get into the spring. Like once you get close to application deadlines, it's there's a lot of people in line to be read. And law school admissions offices also have a lot of other stuff going on at that point. They're planning admitted students weekends. I mean, it is a crazy, crazy time for law school admissions offices. There's a big difference between end of the calendar year and end of the spring in terms of the amount of seats left.
And I would also imagine that there's less scholarship money available later in this cycle, I've heard.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's kind of, it depends on how you define later in the cycle. I don't want someone to think, oh, I'm applying in December, there's not going to be any scholarship money available for me. That is not true. But yes, I mean, if you are, it just depends. If you're admitted later in the cycle, often schools will, they're kind of accounting for the admits that they're going to make, and kind of planning accordingly in terms of scholarship money. I think really, often when it comes into play can be, if you are at the very end of the application cycle, you apply at the deadline, almost, you're not read until, into the spring, you're getting a late decision in April. It really depends on how the school does things. If they've already gotten most of their offers out and doled out that scholarship money, then there may not be much left. It can also be an issue, obviously admitted then from the wait list. There may not be any scholarship money available. Sometimes applicants get scholarships from the wait list, and that varies by school and year to year.
So I feel comfortable saying on this one, it depends. And I do want to encourage folks to check out the Spivey blog, because Spivey is doing something that I haven't seen anyone else doing in the industry, detailed data analysis. And even Mike himself has been on the forum for years, posting, doing this sort of detailed analytics that very few people, no one really else I've seen is doing. So the blog is the place to find that. I definitely encourage folks to check it out.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate that. I know Mike will appreciate that too. Mike is very, he is, on top of everything, law school admissions related. So,
yes, Spivey is following things very closely in the admissions space.
Yeah.
All right, let's look at some of these other questions here. All right, so Brittany's asking, how often or not do AdComs consider applicants whose LSAT scores are below the school's average? Or we can adjust this to say median, perhaps, since that's how things are often discussed.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is they always consider applicants that are below the median. Because I think contrary to popular belief, and, Steve, I'm curious if you hear this from your clients, but I think there's a misconception that there are cuts and that schools just have, groups of applicants that they're, saying, well, these scores are below a certain point, we won't even consider them. And, full disclosure, there may be schools that operate in that way. I, never worked at one, and never been, we read every application. And I know a lot of schools that do. So I think most schools are always going to consider that applicant. What are that applicant's chances of admission? Are a different question, or is a different question. And, it depends on a lot of things. I mean, if that applicant has a GPA that's above median, that will be obviously incredibly helpful for that applicant. If that applicant has put together a really outstanding application, that could help. Not going to be, determinative alone, but it can help. If that applicant has a really Now, maybe they have a really compelling story or background. That can certainly be a factor. So I think I'd say it's always considered, or in most cases, those applicants are considered. The reality is the schools are also looking at their needs. So it depends on a lot of other factors, primarily the GPA. I guess how seriously that applicant is considered.
I'm glad you brought up the idea of cutoffs, Jayme, because that is a common misconception I hear from students a lot. What are the cutoffs? What are the hard numbers? Students are looking at the LSAC site with the medians, 25th and 75th percentiles and whatnot. And there really, as you said, there really are not hard cutoffs. Yeah. At the same time, though, Harvard is not able to take students with 145s. Like, even if they want to, even if everything else was great, they have the rankings to consider, the reputation, and the numbers do get factored in, of course. And so I guess as your job as an applicant is get the best numbers possible to give them more reasons to say yes.
Absolutely. Another quick follow-up on that. I would encourage applicants, you're obviously seeing the medians, you're seeing the 25th and 75th. Medians are the most important. Look at the law school's website, and they may publish their range. So we actually, when I was at Chicago, published our range. And we did it for a couple of reasons, but the main one being because for a period of time we had a pretty tight, 25th to 75th. I mean, I think it was maybe, a 169 and a 173. So that's a really narrow, score range there. And we didn't want people to be discouraged. And we really wanted applicants to understand, there's more to this than just the LSAT. And we are looking at applicants with a far greater score range. So I think, 1 year, our score range was, a 150 to a 180. And that's really everyone in the class. So not all schools do that. But if they do, I think that can be helpful information. I didn't want to create any unrealistic expectations there. But it's still helpful, I think, to see, it's a 25th and a 75th for a reason. There are people above and below that.
Right. Thanks for that. I think that's really cool that schools do that. And I guess it's at the school's discretion, at their desire, if they want to publish it or not. They're required to submit the 25th and 75th, which is why you have that comprehensively on LSAC's site and the U.S. News and whatnot. But then some schools choose to be a little bit more transparent, I suppose. It's very cool to see. All right, let's see other questions here. What else have we got? Edith is saying, just to touch lastly on this point of timing in the cycle, Edith is asking, taking LSAT in November, turning in applications by Christmas, is that too late for top 14 law schools, or do students still have chances then?
No, it's not too late for top 14 law schools, and students still have a chance then. There's a lot of offers to be made for applicants to submit their applications around Christmas.
No, thanks for confirming that. We've got one here from Brittany asking about LSAT timing. If someone's looking to apply to law school this cycle, when should they take the LSAT? Should they take the LSAT I'm actually not sure if they got the dates right on this.
Okay.
I'm assuming they're looking to apply next fall. And should they take the LSAT in the summer before or the fall before? Like a year prior. And I suppose, at least my answer on this would be, take it when you're ready.
Yep.
But earlier is better, so you have chances to retake if possible.
Agree on all points.
When do you typically, let's say as a former admission officer, when you were at Chicago, would you look at someone having taken the LSAT earlier as being a sign of proper planning and taking the process more seriously? Or at the end of the day, is it really just the score is the score and they apply when they apply?
I don't know that I really thought that much about it. I don't know that I really felt like, I was in a position to, evaluate or get a second guess. I just didn't, frankly, put that much thought into someone's choice of when to take it. Certainly, if you have someone who's taken the LSAT, well before the cycle starts, and they, have a great score, and their application is, really, put together and buttoned up and well done, and they're submitting, on the earlier side, there was definitely an impression of like, this person has their act together. And so I suppose to some extent that could factor into it, but honestly, I didn't see like, oh, they took the June LSAT, you know, had their act together more than someone who took September. You know, you just don't know what people's personal circumstances are.
Right. Did you see that article going around a few months back about that girl, like a high school 16-year-old who got into like a ton of law schools?
I actually didn't.
I'll send you they kept popping up on my news all the time. And so I'm thinking of these like precocious like college kids who just get everything done way in advance, but they also have they don't have all the life responsibilities that many other applicants do, like especially as the average age of applicants has increased in recent years. I'd imagine that most people, if they have like graduate school or families or full-time jobs, it might just not be realistic for most people. So I'm not imagining that most people would have it done that early.
Yeah, I did not see that. And yeah, most people are not doing it that early. And I don't know that early.
You certainly wouldn't expect it.
Yeah, it's not expected. And I don't know that it's necessarily like overly positive either. But.
Right. Okay, let's see what else have we got here. Okay, what about early decision? Early decision for law school, how prevalent is that? Is it recommended?
Yeah, great question. And it depends. Early decision can be a fantastic option for some applicants. The first thing is you have to, it really needs to be your first choice. You need to be 100, if more time, I assume we're talking binding early decision and not just some sort of accelerated, your non-binding program, but binding early decision, you have to know you want to go to that school. And you also have to be okay with not knowing other options. So I always counsel my clients when I'm thinking about applying early decision. That's one of the things I ask them. Obviously, A, how much do you want to be at the school? And then B, are you going to be okay if, say you get a few decisions back before this early decision comes back, and your cycle is going well? Are you going to have buyer's remorse there? Or are you okay not knowing? You may get an early decision somewhere, and you probably won't have heard from Harvard. So I'm just using that as an example, but it's like, are you okay, foregoing those opportunities and never knowing? If the answer to those questions is yes, and sometimes it is, then another key point is thinking about the money factor. Because often there are no scholarships associated. Sometimes there are scholarships associated with early decision. There's a few schools that have that. But often you have to be prepared not to have any scholarship aid. So how significant is scholarship aid to you? And that alone can be a determinative factor for some applicants. And then you're going to be on that when you're thinking about it from an admission standpoint. There are some schools where you only know early decision to provide a bump for certain, for some applicants. If someone is significantly below both medians, is early decision going to make that big of a difference? Probably not. But let's say someone's borderline, it could be, at some schools, it could be a good decision. So it really depends on the school. And that's certainly something that when we work with applicants, if someone's thinking about early decision, something we talk about extensively, but that is, really can depend on the school, and the applicant has to be able to answer those questions.
Right. I'm really glad you brought up the point about the scholarship money, because that's the biggest thing on my mind whenever I hear early decision, because law school is quite expensive and there is a lot of scholarship money available. And of course, there's that trade-off between your school brand name, top 14 versus more scholarship aid. But these are important decisions that have very long-term ramifications.
Yeah. And that's an important point, that it's a highly, this is a highly complex decision process. And, we always encourage applicants to really, dig deep on this. You're not just looking at rankings. You really need to look at, there's no right answer to how you weight different factors. But you really need to think about all of the different factors and how important they are to you. We have this new cool tool on our website called My Rank by Spivey, and it lets you put in different factors and how much that you rank, how much they mean to you. But it's a really, it's definitely important to just go beyond name of school and what its current ranking happens to be.
I definitely want to recommend that My Ranking tool. I think it's incredible that you all put that together, because there's no reason that we need to all go by the U.S. News rankings that factor in how much money is spent per student on massages or how many books are in the library. Like nobody cares about that. But if you can actually make your personalized ones for what is a personal decision, that seems much more fitting. So I would definitely encourage folks to check that out. Let's see. We have so many questions here. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of these, but if we don't get to your question, please understand that we did have a lot here, and you can always email us to follow up and we'll do our best to address them. So let's see what else. Nikki's asking, what if you're rejected from a school and then you reapply the following year? Do you have to redo your personal statement? Can you reuse that? What happens with the application?
Yeah. So what happens with the application varies by school. There are some schools that will look at your prior application. There are some schools that won't. They are starting anew, blank slates. What should you do as an applicant? Well, the first thing I want to do is think about, what could it have been? Why was that not the decision that I wanted? Why was that a negative decision? And, something, needs to change in the application to change that decision. And is it retaking the LSAT? Did you apply at the deadline? Did you not put the time into your application materials? And those are really the three biggies that we often look at when we're thinking about, should someone expect a different, can someone reasonably expect a different decision the next time they apply? I would not reuse your application materials certainly exactly as they are. There's almost always room for improvement. Some schools will say you need to submit a new personal statement. So that's the first thing I'd say is you need to look at every school's website and read it carefully and see what they tell reapplicants to do. Because some will say, I know of at least a few schools that won't even process your application if you don't have a new letter of recommendation. They will not, let you just keep the same ones. Some require a new personal statement, but I would say best practices, it's figure out where the weaknesses, were in your application, and, there's almost always room for improvement on the application materials.
No, thanks for clarifying that. And I think it might be tough to think about how to write a new personal statement from scratch, but it's worth investing.
And it doesn't have to be completely from scratch. If you really feel like this is it, this is, hey, look, I'm following all of your advice. This was the best personal statement I had. This is what I had to say. Then, that's maybe a situation where I certainly wouldn't want you to submit, lesser personal statement, just to have a different one. So, maybe somewhat case specific in that circumstance.
But as you said, there always is room for improvement on any piece of writing. Writing's never perfected. It's just good enough, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking back to something we were talking about earlier, which was if someone's taking the LSAT in November or January, and how do they work on the application with the LSAT side by side? One thing that occurred to me is, well, you put it away, look at it again a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, and fresh perspective, new set of eyes, you're less emotionally attached to the writing, then you can edit it more. And so even over several evolutions, I imagine that a PS from last year could be reworked to look totally different a year later, even if the topic is the same.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I'm glad you made that point. That's something I meant to say earlier actually, that sometimes stepping away, if you have the luxury of time, I highly recommend taking a step back and sitting on it for a bit. And that's something that I do when I'm looking at documents. I will read them, and then I like to take a few days and take a step back and see, kind of what's sticking with me, how I'm reading it the second time, are my impressions still the same? But that's that situation specifically, that's a great idea to make sure you're taking, because you have that time. So take that time to step back. Right.
And just on the topic of personal statements, I have this habit of coming up with terrible, cutesy personal statement ideas, and I want to run one by you. What if someone were to write a personal statement that were like the style of an LSAT logical reasoning question, just to demonstrate their argumentative ability for why they should go to law school? Yay or nay?
Well, maybe you can tell by my face that I am cringing a little bit. Nay.
Okay.
It's not
harsh.
It's not necessary. your personal statement, well, said it needs to be authentic and genuine. It's not necessarily a place to be overly creative. It's like there's some things that are really risky in personal statements. Humor is another one that's very risky in personal statements. If done well, if you can pull it off, then then it works. But there may be a circumstance where someone could pull that off, but I would recommend that sparingly.
Well, I would imagine that for something involving any sort of humor, seriously, it's probably worth running it by someone like yourself, who has the experience to make sure it's being done well, because I'd imagine that it's high risk and high reward, but more risk than reward in a case like that.
Absolutely. I've seen true humor done well one time in a personal statement, and the person happened to have, he'd been a screenwriter for years. This was going to be a second career for him, and so it was no surprise that he was able to execute this beautifully. But it's really there's only one that stands out as humor done really well.
And for the average person who's probably not going through as many rough drafts as they should, they're not going to reach the point of perfection on that.
Yeah, yes, I'd agree with that.
Okay, awesome. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Jayme, and I think that's as good a place to leave off as any. I know we didn't get to all the questions here, but again, please feel free to follow up with us and we'll do our best to address them. Jayme, do you want to share the best way for folks to get in touch with you and learn more about Spivey and the blog
Absolutely.
and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can first I encourage you to go to our website, spiveyconsulting.com. We have a really informative blog. It's really important to us to try to get as much information out there, just that's accessible to everyone. So take a look at the blog, and then also we have a YouTube channel that we are trying to add more videos so that we talk about all sorts of different pieces of the application. But then to reach out to us, you can reach out at info@spiveyconsulting.com. And if you have, I know we didn't get to the questions, and I know there were some technical challenges here. So if you A, have further questions, or B, had trouble hearing something that I had to say, but you want to know what I actually said, then you can email info@spiveyconsulting.com, and they'll get it to me. They'll find me, and I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jayme. And folks who want to get in touch with me, I'm at the LSAT blog. I also have the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast, where I will be publishing this video, and I will actually try to get captions on it at some point down the line. So if any audio issues, hopefully the captions will at least resolve that so everyone can understand everything. But we'll be getting this out to you all regardless. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. It was really a pleasure having you in tonight and having your great questions. And please reach out if you need anything at all.